at least one deep mindful inhalation and exhalation, just to relax and settle down. योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहु पुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिं गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुर्गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। हरिः ओम्। As I was standing next to the Ganga and watching the flow of the river flowing in front of me, when I was waiting for this program to start, I was thinking, what an amazing flow, what an amazing river, which brings the purity, nourishment, sense of cool from the higher Himalayan mountains to the rest of the country and makes those sacred waters from the highest peak, which are extremely inaccessible for the rest of the country. Maybe today they are quite accessible, but at least in ancient times, traveling beyond this place, Rishikesh, precisely this place, was a great challenge, because traveling through the forests and the mountains is not an easy task. I remember it even back in 1986 and 87, when I, with my parents, traveled on foot just from Rishikesh to Devaprayag, completely on foot. And it was not on this side which everybody travels. The road was already there in 86, but we took the old path, the original path to Badrinath, which is on that side of the river, goes through Garud Chatti, Phul Chatti, etc. And many times, because the path was less trodden, sometimes we used to get lost. It was very difficult to find sometimes the path amongst the bushes, amongst the stones, amongst the cliffs. And I think it was half of the way where there is this another bridge like Ramjhula back then, that we finally decided to cross over and come to this side, because it was getting so difficult. And then we took the proper main road and reached Devaprayag by walking on foot on the proper main road. But then again, when we were coming back, my parents decided that we did not walk on that path half of the way, so let's walk back from that side. So like the number 8, half of the way on both sides, we walked, but it was extremely challenging. That's how challenging it used to be. My father did this journey in the 50s, right up to Badrinath on foot, when it was even more challenging. The point that I was trying to make through this example was that the same is true about Yoga Ganga, the river of yoga. The path of yoga, sometimes because less understood, less walked upon, the further we go, the deeper we go, the more obscure, the more subtle it becomes. And ultimately, like Guruji used to say, like the masters of yoga themselves say, that yoga in itself becomes the torch. Yoga itself becomes the path, becomes the shore of the path, the guide on this path. But a place like Rishikesh, where like Ganga flows out of the mountain and reaches the plains, where it becomes easily accessible to everyone. Also from centuries, Rishikesh has been a place where this river of yoga flew into the plains, from away from the mountains into the plains, where it became easily accessible for everyone to explore yoga. And that is why Rishikesh, correctly pronounced as Rishikesha, has been such an important place from extremely ancient times. However, like when the Ganga flows through Rishikesh and beyond, sadly, she also starts to get contaminated. And that you can see the further you go along the Ganga. If I have walked along the Ganga on this side, I have also walked along the Ganga on this side up to Kachala, which is around, I think, 400, 500 kilometers along the Ganga, down the stream. And the further you go, the more contamination is found there. There are spots, areas where the water is just completely black. And sadly, that's also a little bit sometimes the case with Yoga Ganga, as yoga has gone to the masses. I don't need to point out what all is going on in the name of yoga, but everybody knows it. Anybody who has a little bit, who remains in touch with Google and all this today, internet, we know what all.
Sir, 14 ऐसे तो 14 लड़कियां हैं, 14 ठीक हो।
ये कहाँ से आए? This was Akashvani, heavenly voice. Somebody searching 14 girls. Okay. But at least what I'm still very happy is that before Rishikesh, up to Rishikesh, the water of the Ganga is clean and pure, has been maintained quite clean and pure. When I go to the Ganga, I can drink it. I can't say the same beyond Rishikesh, but up to Rishikesh, I can drink it, I can sip it without any problem, at least just talking about myself. And the same is the case with the river of yoga, Yoga Ganga, that in Rishikesh, from antiquity, this purity, authenticity of yoga has been maintained, and it is our attempt to maintain that authenticity, that purity of yoga. But how do we do that? How does the water of Ganga remain pure when there is an incessant, unblocked flow of the river from its very origin? That's the most important thing. The more you block it, the more you contaminate it. And that's why many of us, not only me, I was there, but many of us, thousands of us, protested, for example, against the dam in Tehri in the 90s, because we believed that by blocking the flow of the river from its source, we are in fact contaminating, killing the medical properties of this sacred river. It didn't work. Many things don't work in this world. Changes happen. We have to live with those changes. But an attempt should always be made. And the same is true in the case of Yoga Ganga, which means when we go back to the very, very source of the yogic teachings, and we bring those ideas into our modern life, into our modern perspective, into our modern understanding of yoga, into our modern practice of yoga, that is when its authenticity, that's when its original meaning and significance is retained. And what I will be doing within the next few days will be today, tomorrow, and on the 6th, will be a humble attempt to bring some of those authentic, ancient masters' original teachings, some drops from there, into the modern time, by looking at them from a modern perspective and trying to understand how that could benefit us in our understanding of yoga. So that's why the subject will be the various meanings of the word yoga, in which the word yoga has been used by the masters. Today we have given to it a very specific significance, a very specific meaning. For us, the moment we hear the word yoga, we think of asanas. We think of what in English you can call yogic postures. So we straight away think of asanas. Is recording शुरू कर रहे हैं? Because it disturbs. He has to, if he wants to, then, if I want to focus, then. I'm the one who is weak, that I'm unable to keep my focus. So that's a good training for me, to keep my focus, to keep my attention. Thank you, sir. Okay. So, first of all, when we speak of the origin of yoga, which masters do we have in our mind? Who is the founder of yoga? Would you like to give an answer to this question? Patanjali, Maharshi Patanjali, Hiranyagarbha, Shiva, Parvati. I asked for one. We have Hiranyagarbha, we have Shiva, we have Maharshi Patanjali, we have even Parvati. Any other possibilities? Maharshi Kapila. Yes. Usually, Patanjali is very often, we hear the name Patanjali. Quite often, even in the inauguration, everybody was speaking about Patanjali. I recited Patanjali's Yoga Sutras during the inauguration. But Patanjali cannot be considered as the founder of yoga, because he's just a very seminal and great author who systematically presents the teachings of yoga that were widely practiced and learned and discussed at his time. Just if Patanjali would be the founder of yoga, then just imagine yoga would have been 2,200 years old, because that is approximately the time of Patanjali. Patanjali lived at the time of Pushyamitra Shunga, one of the great rulers of the Magadha kingdom, about whom we know very precisely that he ruled for 36 years between 186 and 140. अरे भाई इसको बंद करो, आकाशवाणी को बंद करो भाई. Okay. Is my range going that side also? Okay. Yeah. Okay, let's try. Yes. Okay. So, Patanjali's mother herself was a great yogini, Gonika. She is known to be a great yogini. And even the very first, if someone would carefully study Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, in the very beginning, in the very first sutra, he uses the word anu, which simply means that I'm teaching something that I have received from my own masters. That word is there to give credit to his masters from whom he received the teachings. Another very, very important idea in the yogic traditions, to always give credit to our masters. For example, sometimes I see sayings written here and there, and I recognize, oh, this saying is by Guruji, this saying is by this and this master. And yet, if the name is not there, then it's not giving credit. And we say in the tradition of yoga that whoever has done something for us, to express our gratitude to that master is tremendously important. And what can we do? Just remember their name. That is the biggest gratitude that we can express to them. So, if Patanjali is not the master of yoga, then the first master of yoga, then who? If you look at Patanjali's all commentators, by which I mean the most ancient commentators, 6th century, Vyasa, anybody, they all mention sage Kapila as the first master of yoga. So at least we can remember them. We can remember the name. Otherwise, even if in such places where international yoga festivals are being held, if the very founding father of yoga's name even is not even remembered, even not mentioned, I feel that it is extremely sad. The Mahabharata itself calls him Sankhya Yoga Pravartakaha. Pravartakaha, which means the very founder. Pravartaka means it's like it's the same word, Varta. Varta, we have this word also in English, introvert, extrovert, vert, this vert, divert. Vart, which means to set something into motion. Someone who started it. So Kapila is Yoga Pravartaka, who set the ball rolling. That is Kapila. Even for Mahabharata, he is Yoga Pravartaka. He is the founder of yoga. The same thing we find, that's why his name is also taken in the Yoga Upanishads frequently, whether it is the most ancient Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Krishna himself pays his respect to him in the Bhagavad Gita, that Siddhanam Kapilo Munihi, amongst the Siddhas, amongst the accomplished ones, I am sage Kapila. So, next time somebody asks you who is the founding father of yoga, you can very easily and very emphatically and very boldly, you can say that it is Kapila. All yoga masters, all yogic traditions, including the Mahabharata, have stated him to be the founder of yoga. Now this is the case in Raja Yoga tradition. Raja Yoga is the yoga of Patanjali. Raja Yoga is the yoga, it's the word that is used for yoga as it was practiced and understood before Hatha Yoga came into existence. Before that, yoga was known as Raja Yoga. When Hatha Yoga comes into existence, particularly in the 10th century, with Guru Gorakshanatha, with Matsyendranatha, with all these great Natha masters, Hatha Yoga tradition comes into the picture. Then for the Hatha Yoga masters, when they speak of the original founding father of Hatha Yoga traditions, then they refer to Adinatha. Adinatha, which is another name of Lord Shiva. Adinatha, Adi Yogi, these words. So for example, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the great work on Hatha Yoga, 15th century, when it starts Adinathaya Namostu Tasmai. I bow down to Adinatha, Yenopadishta, who taught us Hatha Yoga Vidya, the wisdom, the teachings, the knowledge of Hatha Yoga. So there, the word Adinatha, for the first time in Hatha Yoga tradition, the Hatha Yogic masters started to refer to Adi Yogi, Adinatha, starting from the 10th century works. And that's why most of the Hatha Yoga texts are either spoken by Shiva to Parvati, as Mataji mentioned Parvati's name, for example, Shiva Samhita, Ghiranda Samhita, these texts, beautiful texts on Hatha Yoga, which as practitioners of Hatha Yoga, we should explore to go back to the very origins. I'm not saying it is easy. Like it is not easy to walk to even today it is not easy to walk to the very origins of the sacred river. You have to drive around 200 kilometers up to Gangotri, where originally the glacier used to be. But now the glacier has gone back another 14 kilometers. So then you have to walk 14 kilometers through the perilous mountains. Sometimes there are stretches where constantly big stones are falling down from above. So it's extremely dangerous. It is. I've done the journey, so I know how dangerous it is. You have to see whether stones are falling down. So it's a perilous journey, and yet thousands of people do it to reach the very origin, to reach the very source of this physical Ganga. Then why shouldn't we undertake a similar journey by going to the very source, by exploring these teachings of the masters? Nobody says it's easy, but it's possible, and it's an extremely beautiful journey. And what I find in many of those collection of teachings, whether it is the yoga which transcends the mind, a collection of teachings by Guru Gorakshanatha, whether it is the rosary of the pearls of yoga by Srinivasa, whether it is different texts on Hatha Yoga, all of them always refer to Adinatha, Shiva, as the original master. Now, when I started searching for a temple of Adinatha, where Shiva is worshipped in his Adinatha form, I could not find any ancient temple in India, but in an area which used to belong to India, which was part of India up to 1947, but today is known as Bangladesh, there is an extremely ancient temple of Lord Shiva, and it is still present there, it is still functioning there, where the form of Lord Shiva is worshipped as Adinatha, as the first Natha. The only, if you find any other ancient temple of Adinatha, I would be very interested about hearing such a temple. Now, you would ask me, but what is the difference between Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga? Are they two different traditions? Are they simply different traditions? Or do they address different aspects of yoga? So if you ask, just before I continue with this, if you ask a Hatha Yoga traditional master, he will say Adinatha or Shiva. If you ask a Raja Yoga master, he will say Kapila. Now, what is the difference between these two traditions? Hatha Yoga is simply understood to be a preparation for Raja Yoga. That is what Hatha Yoga is. In fact, Hatha Yoga Pradipika in the very beginning uses the wonderful example of staircases. Hatha Yoga are like the staircases to reach Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is the goal and Hatha Yoga is the means. All the means that have been emphatically and in great detail described in Hatha Yoga, for example, asana, for example, pranayama, for example, the different mudras that Hatha Yoga Pradipika, texts like Hatha Yoga Pradipika speak about, asana, pranayama, mudras. And then all these practices, they are meant as preparatory to Patanjali's Raja Yoga. They are like staircases, the foundation. So if Raja Yoga is the deeper meditative aspect of yoga, then Hatha Yoga is the very foundation on which that mansion, that palace, that fort, that skyscraper is built. And if the foundation is shaky, if the foundation is weak, then you cannot build the skyscraper. If you want to build a skyscraper of 100 stories, you have to go equally deep into the ground. Isn't it? Am I correct? Are you following me? Am I saying something which is beyond logic? Okay. So, Hatha is that Hatha Yoga provides that very foundation for Raja Yoga. If somebody completely just would focus on Raja Yoga without preparation through Hatha Yoga, then the moment we start to grow, it becomes shaky because the foundation is shaky. And that's why Hatha Yoga is there. In fact, at the time of, I should say before Hatha Yoga came into existence, at the time of when the first commentary on the Yoga Sutras was written, there were many different traditions of yoga even then. There was the Sankhya tradition of yoga, which is Patanjali's tradition of yoga, beautifully explained by Patanjali. It's just one of the many traditions, one of the many streams. You could see that, for example, when Ganga reaches Haridwar, she diverts into many streams. The moment water flows into the plains, it spreads out. And then the same water starts to flow through many streams. That is how the different traditions of yoga come into existence. Ultimately, each tradition ascertains one thing, that in a sense, there is no difference when it comes to yoga. On the level of yoga, on the level of practical aspect of yoga, whether it is asana, whether it is pranayama, whether it is meditation, there every tradition is united. But the way they teach it, the way they explain it, the way they practice, the way they describe it to their students, that might be a little bit different. Sometimes specifically the philosophical framework, because like the language is different sometimes from country to country, the language is different. Also sometimes philosophical frameworks are different. So the teachings of yoga were presented in different philosophical frameworks. So for example, Patanjali's framework is the framework of Sankhya. And that's why to understand Patanjali thoroughly, one has to explore also Kapila's Sankhya, because the entire framework in which Patanjali is presenting his teachings of yoga is the Sankhya framework. So Patanjali is a great master in the Sankhya tradition, but that was not the only yogic tradition. At least in the 4th or 5th century India, there were many more yogic traditions that we hear of. There was, from the 1st century onwards, there was the Buddhist yogic tradition known as Yogachara. Yogachara, the practice of yoga. Achara means practice. Yogachara, the yoga. In fact, most of the technical terminology that Patanjali uses is either used only by Patanjali or by masters in the Yogachara tradition. And many of the cryptic words that Patanjali doesn't explain have to be, in fact, explored, and their meaning has to be explored by looking at the teachings of the Yogachara masters, Acharya Asanga, Vasubandhu, who gave rise to Mahayana Buddhism, which is the dominant form of Buddhism in Tibet, in China, and in Japan, in all these countries. And that's why today, whenever Chinese groups come to our yoga center, I always ask them the question that, do you know that you have an ancient word for yoga in your own country, in your own language, which reached you 1,500 years ago, which they pronounce today, they all also call yoga. But that yoga which reached them 1,500 years ago, in Yogachara, they call it Yujia. So there was also this prominent Buddhist yoga tradition, and then there was, which presented yoga in Buddha's framework. The presentation was that of yoga. It was just presenting yoga, but the framework was Buddha's teachings. Patanjali's framework was Sankhya teaching. Then Yogachara's framework was philosophical framework, was Buddha's teachings. And we have great yogis in Tibet. Even it is said about Krishnamacharya, the very founding father of yoga in modern times, through Pattabhi Joyce and through our Guruji, B.K.S. Iyengar, where the very origin of yoga in modern times. If you read his biography, it is said that he too traveled for a while to Tibet and explored yoga in Tibet. That's what I read in his biography. So there are beautiful documentaries on Tibetan yogis. So yoga is part of culture from extreme antiquity. So in the same way, like there is this Sankhya stream of yoga, then there is this Buddhist stream of yoga, then there is also the Jaina stream of yoga. For example, even in Rishikesh, there are beautiful Jaina temples here. When you go towards Haridwar, there are beautiful Jaina temples here. And there have been great Jaina masters from the 4th, 5th century onwards, such as Haribhadra Suri, and then Hemachandra in the 11th century, who have written extensively on the subject of yoga, but from a Jaina philosophical perspective. So and the beautiful thing in their teachings is that, yes, our philosophical framework might be different, but the practice, in a sense, there is no difference. What we are teaching is the same as any other stream of yoga is teaching. Avirodhena tattvataha, his word. I love this word because he says, tattvataha, in a sense, there is no virodha, there is no opposition between my teachings, which are being presented in a Jaina framework. It was simply yoga being presented for the followers of Jainism so that they too can practice yoga. So that was the beautiful approach. And then there was also the Tantra school of yoga, the Agama school of yoga, which has its origins again in extreme antiquity, and which was then later developed into all these teachings of Kundalini yoga, meditation on Kundalini, the different 6 chakras, which are influential also on the Hatha yoga teachings which started in the 10th century. So these tantra, which are a huge collection of teachings composed by anonymous authors, but always presented as a dialogue between Shiva and Parvati, that's also another stream of yoga. And then I must not forget the most ancient one, and the most, which has been in India really the most influential one, is the Upanishadic stream of yoga, the Vedantic stream of yoga, the stream of yoga which has its origins in the Upanishads, not in one person's teachings, but in a collection of teachings of many, many masters. And why I say that this has been the most influential, because, for example, look at texts like the Bhagavad Gita, which is a yoga shastra, which is one of the most widely read books, texts on yoga today in India and all around the world. There are similar other works such as Yoga Vasishtha, which many great masters in this region have been exploring since ancient times. I remember my father always tells me this story, that when he came to Rishikesh for the first time in 1940s as a 16, 17, 18 years old boy, one of the first teachers and masters in Rishikesh that he met was someone called Ramakrishna. And Ramakrishna, the Punjab Sindh Kshetra, which is quite a famous kshetra in Rishikesh, was, I think, founded by him or by his disciples. I don't precisely know. But he never lived in the city. He used to live in Sheshadhara, which is down next to the Ganga between Lakshman Jhula and Ram Jhula. Now, of course, Ram Jhula only came into existence now. And his ashram is still there. It's on this side when you go down, on the right side, that ashram, which is mostly always closed. But Ramakrishna, this great sage of Rishikesh, he had come from Sindh, which is now in Pakistan. And he used to live there completely in solitude. He never left that area, and only what he used to do, his food used to come from Rishikesh, and somebody used to come every day to recite to him Yoga Vasishtha, the teachings on yoga by sage Vasishtha to Lord Rama. Again, a beautiful collection of teachings on yoga, Yoga Vasishtha. An abridged version of it is is available in English, and the Shivananda yoga tradition, Swami Venkateshananji, all these great yoga masters which took yoga to the West, they used to speak a lot about Yoga Vasishtha, about the teachings of Yoga Vasishtha. In their teachings you can find it very easily. So, for example, Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Vasishtha, or even works on Hatha Yoga such as Yoga Yajnavalkya, which are dialogues between sage Yajnavalkya and Gargi, this great female philosopher of ancient times. They all belong to the Upanishadic tradition, the Vedantic tradition of yoga. And why I'm saying that it is the most influential one, because Patanjali's yoga tradition has survived only after merging into this Vedantic tradition. It started to merge into it already in the time of Shankaracharya in the 8th century AD, and beyond that, Patanjali's teachings were continued to be studied and taught only as part of this tradition, until the revival recently, when suddenly yoga became famous all around the world. It was mostly only the Advaita Vedantic tradition which was learning and teaching Patanjali's yoga. Hatha yoga in itself is deeply influenced by that. So it's a continuous stream that has been there. And that's why do you know who made the Yoga Sutra famous in the West? The first author who was widely read in the West, who made the Yoga Sutras famous in the West. Precisely, yes. Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga was, Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga was the first work that really made yoga famous in the West after he was traveling in the United States and gave many, many discourses on yoga. And Swami Vivekananda was within the Advaita Vedanta tradition. He had studied it within the Advaita Vedanta tradition, and that's why Patanjali's yoga philosophy was well known to him, and that's why he taught it as a practical aspect to the rest of the world. So, now comes the question. Ask Hatha Yogis, it is Shiva. Ask Raja Yogis, it is Kapila. Out of these two, who? Let's ask Patanjali. What does he say? For Patanjali, it is insignificant to worry about who is the original, the most ancient master of yoga. He is interested in the master that is present here and now within the hearts of all beings. And because it is present within the hearts of all beings, it is present within our hearts. It is that master is present within each one of us, and that master was also present within the most ancient masters, whoever they were, whether it was Kapila, whether it was Patanjali, or whether it was anyone. And that's why when Patanjali is asked, then he says that consciousness which resides within the hearts of all beings, that consciousness is the master of even the Guru, the master of even the most ancient masters, because this is the only master which is beyond the limitations of time. It is the master, the only master that is beyond kalena anavachchedat. Avachcheda means limitation, which is beyond any limitation. And that master is present within everyone's heart. It was present within those ancient masters' heart. And whoever wants to call it in whatever name, that's their choice. If in Raja Yoga tradition, some want to call it Kapila, no problem. If some want to call it Hiranyagarbha, no problem at all. If in Hatha Yoga tradition, somebody wants to call it Shiva, Adinatha, no problem at all. If in the Buddhist traditions, they want to call it the timeless Buddha, no problem. If in any tradition, whatever they want to call it, whatever name and form they want to give it, no problem. As long as their teachings and their fingers are pointing to this master, the master that is within the heart of every being. That is the master, that is the ultimate yoga master that Patanjali himself speaks about. Patanjali's commentators might be speaking about Kapila, but Patanjali himself, without giving any particular name to that original master, he just says that it is this timeless master within. And I would say that the Upanishadic masters would completely agree when they say that when I'm desirous of acquiring freedom from ignorance, then let me take refuge in that master, which is the light that enlightens even my intellect, that enlightens our mind, that enlightens our body with the light of consciousness. let me take refuge in that light of consciousness. And I think every tradition of yoga is ultimately a path to find that light within oneself, that inner light, that light within oneself. So yes, Patanjali is undoubtedly, my intention was not to downplay the importance of Patanjali. He is a great towering figure in the field of yoga. His Yoga Sutras have, despite all these different traditions of yoga and countless works on yoga, his work, the Yoga Sutras, stands out beyond any other work. He is repeatedly quoted by so many great masters. So whenever authors quote an authority on yoga, it is mostly he who is quoted, even the ancient masters. And his teachings have fascinated foreign scholars from extreme antiquity. Whether it was, for example, a beautiful collection of teachings, Javanese teachings in Java, Dharma Patanjala, which was recently translated into English by a university in Holland. And that's how I came across this text, Dharma Patanjala, a beautiful collection of Patanjali's explanation, particularly the first 3 chapters as explained in Java in the 7th century by Lord Shiva to his son Kartikeya, to his son Kumara, as a dialogue. So it was translated into ancient Javanese 1200, 1300 years ago as Dharma Patanjala. In the 10th century, when Al-Biruni came to India, he translated the Yoga Sutras into Arabic, the first ever foreign translation into the Yoga Sutras. And like this, over the centuries, the Yoga Sutras have been always tremendously influential. Can you believe that one of the most influential and most respectful emperor, Mughal emperor, in fact, I think the grandfather of the one who created Taj Mahal, which everybody, I'm speaking about Akbar, who was very universal in his approach. His Prime Minister, Abul Fazl, he also speaks a lot about the Yoga Sutras in his life on Akbar. So even at that time, in the 15th century, during the Mughal era, the Yoga Sutras were a highly respected work. The work which was in consideration, which was being taught and studied even by Muslim rulers, by the Prime Minister of the Emperor of India. So, like this, Patanjali has been a very influential figure. Yoga is a way of life, but to be able to lead a yogic way of life, we have to find ways to incorporate the various meanings of the word into our life. That is how a yogic life will be developed. First of all, into our practice of yoga, and then also into our daily life. So that is the reason we chose this subject for my classes, as to what is the meaning of, what are the various meanings of the word yoga. The meaning that Patanjali gives to the word yoga is a very advanced one, and I will touch upon it towards the end of my talk, which will be tomorrow. But let's start with something more easy to understand, something more fundamental. Everybody speaks of yoga means union, yoga means union. But something that we never speak about is completely the opposite, which means separation, disjunction. And one of the meanings of the word yoga, like it means union, yoga also means completely the opposite of it, which means disjunction, which means separation. In Hindi, we know it as Viyoga. viyoga, viyoga, which means separation. It is in fact even a feeling, a rasa, which the kind of suffering that a lover feels when a lover is separated from the beloved. That is viyoga bhava, the suffering of viyoga, the suffering of separation. So, the first meaning, which is quite counterintuitive, but has been defined, yoga has been defined like this nowhere else than in the Bhagavad Gita itself. In the chapter on yoga, which is the 6th chapter, where Krishna says, Tam vidyat, understand that to be yoga, dukkha sanyoga viyoga. He uses the word. Dukkha means suffering, sanyoga means coming together with suffering, and viyoga means separation. That is known as yoga. Separation, so his definition, his very definition of yoga in the 6th chapter that Krishna gives is in fact the opposite. Yoga sanjitam, what is called sanjya means name. What is given the name of yoga is in fact separation from suffering. A state in which there is complete separation from pain and agony, from depression, from any mental state of suffering, any inner suffering. That is called, in fact, the Sanskrit word for suffering, which is dukkha, simply means a bad space, a bad inner space. When this inner space suddenly becomes very bad. And many times it has a reason that it becomes bad. We feel really bad from within. And sometimes there is no reason at all. There is no reason at all. Sometimes there is no reason at all, and yet we feel bad. And sometimes there are all reasons to feel bad, and yet we don't feel bad from within. A typical example is a mother giving birth. She has all reasons to be sad. She has to suffer tremendously. Tremendous pain, tremendous physical pain is there for her, and yet she looks forward to it. That pain gives her tremendous joy, tremendous happiness. Tremendous happiness. And so even in that moment when there is so much pain, is she really suffering? Internally. I'm talking about that internal space where she is, despite those cries, despite those shouting, which I've only seen, of course, on films. But I guess it represents the reality that mothers can tell better. But despite all that pain, within there is a good space, there is a happy space. And this tells us that our inner space should not necessarily be influenced by what is happening outside. And this is a technique, there is a method, there are practices, there is a way of life, that if a person leads that, if a person practices those techniques, if a person learns to develop that inner space in such a way, then whatever sufferings, whatever external pain might be there, that inner space remains sukha, ananda, prosperous, joyful, happy, even in moments of toughness, even in moments of difficulty. So that is what yoga is about. Separation from suffering. If suffering, inevitably, in our life, the yogic masters, they don't give us any false hopes. Today, they do. Yes, today they do. Because today, it's part of business strategy. But the ancient yogic masters, nahavaisa sharirasya sataha priya priyayoho apahatihi asti. to be very realistic, a very realistic statement, as long as the body is present, priya and apriya, pleasant and unpleasant, will be there. Whatever we do, they will come up. We can't change that. Even if we are supremely healthy through the practice of yoga, will our circumstances always be conducive to happiness? No. There might be tremendously such moments of suffering, which will then make us sad. So, can we retain that inner peace, that inner tranquility, that inner joyfulness, that inner happiness, despite whatever is happening around us? That is what is understood. The skill to achieve such an inner state, that is yoga. That is what it meant for example, when Krishna, he says, tam vidya dukkha sanyoga viyogam yoga sanjitam. I give the name of yoga to that which separates from dukkha. So first of all, yes, yoga helps a lot to reduce suffering in our lives. But despite all our efforts, they will arise. They will arise. And yet, if I can retain that peace within myself, or at least I can come back to it again and again, I know how to enter that inner space and be there and come back to it and remain untouched by what is happening around myself. And that's why in Kurmasana, this asana of the turtle, this asana of the tortoise, this image also in the Gita, it is a representative of a yogin. And to tell you the truth, if you meet even an actual turtle, at least when I met an actual turtle, when I was in Australia in 2002 for the first time, we went on the Sunshine Coast, and I and my father, we saw that there was this, her name was Harriet, and she was a very, very old turtle, originally discovered on the Galapagos by Darwin himself. And Darwin took her back to England, and from there then she was brought to Australia. So she was around, I think, 180 years old or 200 years old. Very, very old, huge. And what I remember is that when I and my father, we walked towards the enclosure of Harriet, and my father really wanted to go there because she was known as the oldest turtle on earth at that time. And so he said he wants to go and visit and then what happened was that she saw us, and she stood up, walked a few steps towards us, and then collapsed in the sense she again sat down. My father had lost his eyes already back then in 2002. He was already completely blind, so he wanted to touch her. She came close, but she did not come to the very end of the enclosure. So I asked the authorities there, will we be allowed to enter the enclosure so that my blind father can touch the turtle? And then they said, yes, of course, no problem, but somebody will be with you. And this was the famous zoo of the crocodile hunter, Steve Irwin's, very famous Hollywood star. His crocodile farm. There she was kept. And then he went into the enclosure, and when we started caressing her, it was a very, very beautiful and a very, very touching experience, the way she reacted to our caressing, and the way she really stood up and enjoyed every moment that we spent with her was deeply touching. And it reminded me of the verse of Krishna in the 2nd chapter, where he describes a yogin like a turtle. And for me, the city of Rishikesh, Even though I don't know if there are turtles here, but because this city of Rishikesh is the city of mastering the senses. That's what Rishikesha means, because Rishika means senses and Isha means the Lord. It's through the practice of pratyahara, which means to pull back one's awareness into oneself like a turtle. Like a turtle pulls back its limbs into the shell. And that is what happens, for example, in Supta Kurmasana. In Supta Kurmasana, all the limbs are pulled back into oneself. So that is what a yogin does. And that is in fact what Shambhavi Mudra is about, which today Isha Foundation has made famous all around the world. Sadguru Jaggi Vasudev, he speaks of Shambhavi Mudra. What is Shambhavi Mudra? People speak of so many different, they are just techniques. For example, looking at the center of your brow, of your eyebrows. That's just one of the many techniques. But what Shambhavi Mudra in reality, if you look at Hatha Yoga Pradipika, what Shambhavi Mudra in reality is: seeing, see not; hearing, hear not. Which means a yogin sees, his eyes are open, but his attention, his awareness is within himself. His senses are looking outside. Completely, normally, he's walking, he's doing whatever he's doing, but his awareness is within himself. So that Shambhavi Mudra is, in a sense, it is like that turtle, not actually pulling back. That's just part of the practice when we close our eyes, close our ear. Some people, many of the masters here in Rishikesh, they teach, these closing all the doors for the practice of meditation. Even the lower two doors, by sitting on the heels, so all the doors are completely pressed and closed. But that is just part of the practice. Ultimately, without closing any door, with open eyes, when we can retain, and that's extremely difficult. I mean, just now repeatedly, whenever somebody comes in, it becomes, I lose my flow, because I still have to work hard on training my attention even further. The moment I see somebody, I get lost, I lose it. So you can see how much, if a meditation practitioner still needs a place which is completely silent, then he's still a beginner. Then he still needs a lot of practice, because ultimately yoga is about that. Not to be influenced by what is happening around us, but to be able to maintain what we want to maintain within ourselves, despite what is happening out there. That is yoga. And everything is a practice, a practical step towards that. So this separation from dukkha, from this inner bed space, which is what Patanjali refers to in the second chapter, because his approach to yoga is very much like Ayurveda. And there, when in the second chapter, which is very similar to his approach to Ayurveda, there where he says, what can be overcome through the practice of yoga? It is the future suffering. Past sufferings are over. What is now in this present moment is extremely tiny. It just lasts for I don't know how many microseconds. But what is now yet to come, that can be avoided. And yoga does everything to avoid that. It introduces a whole change into our life. And that's why yoga also identifies the 5 fundamental causes of suffering: ignorance of one's true nature, misconception of oneself, misunderstanding of oneself, and the resultant selfish attachment, hatred, and fear. These 5 fundamental causes of suffering, and a path that leads to separation from these 5 fundamental causes of suffering. That is the first meaning of yoga. Then, this was just to point out that also the opposite of yoga, what we hear most of the times, that yoga is union, yoga is union. Everybody, the moment I ask this question, what does yoga mean to you? Union, union. Union of what? But before that union, first talk about separation. Separation from this restlessness. Separation from this confusion. Separation from this misunderstanding. Separation from this, from this misunderstanding of oneself. Only then we can move ahead on this path of yoga. And when we move ahead on this path of yoga, then comes the second meaning of the word yoga, which is very simple, which simply means acquisition of something new. That's all. And this is an extremely ancient meaning. You can find it even in the most ancient collection of teachings, to collect something new. And even in modern Hindi language, we use the word tumhara yoga kshema kaise chalega. How will your yoga kshema, how will your yoga, which means for your family, the new things that you need in your life, they are called the acquisition of something new, that is called yoga, and the protection of what is already there, that is called kshema. And in fact, everybody in this world is only worried about these 2 things. How to acquire something new and how to protect that which has already been acquired. But on the path of yoga, the acquisition is not of something material, but of something deeply inner. The acquisition of wisdom, the acquisition of understanding, the acquisition of properties and qualities and virtues which are inspired by that wisdom. And that is when we come to the very foundation of yoga, the yamas and niyamas. When we come to the yamas and niyamas, which have been mentioned by Patanjali even before asana, then when we come to the yamas and niyamas, they are practices which enable us to collect, to acquire beautiful qualities, beautiful virtues, the most beautiful of which is the very first one that Patanjali mentions, which is non-violence, ahimsa, the very foundation. And the yogic masters always say that ahimsa is the most important one out of these 10. In fact, ahimsa is like the step of the footprint of an elephant, in which all footprints are present. In fact, the rest of the 9 are just to refine ahimsa. They are just to refine non-violence. And what does non-violence mean for Patanjali? For him, it is maitri, friendliness, karuna, compassion, mudita, joyfulness, and upeksha, forgiveness. These 4 qualities. So they are constant challenges. Every day we are challenged by our life's circumstances, where we lose them, where violence creeps in our acts, in our words, in our thoughts, where we become non-friendly, where we become unforgiving, where we lose our compassion. So it's a constant challenge. But where do we get this strength from? From the practice of yoga. As we practice yoga, this strength arises from within, and these challenges, but of course this happens only when we have this understanding. So with this understanding, when we practice yoga, then somebody who is practicing asanas, somebody who is practicing pranayama, he should ask these questions, that am I only strong on a physical level, Or do I only want to be strong on a physical level? Or do I also want to be strong on a deeper inner level? Patanjali inspires us to be stronger also on a deeper level, because that is what yoga is about, the acquisition of new properties, new qualities. That is what transformation of life happens. When we come to yoga, our life has to change. If our life remains the same as it was before we came to yoga, then in our understanding of yoga, there is something that should be re-examined. We need to re-examine it. Yoga's effect should be life transforming. And life transforming means that it acquires new virtues, new qualities into our lives. It makes us a better human being. So like this discussion will continue also tomorrow. There are 12 meanings of the word yoga which have been listed. I just spoke today about 2. 10 more have to be discussed. Prior to Patanjali's meanings, some of them more ancient than Patanjali, in which the meanings in which the masters before Patanjali have used it. It is very interesting and these meanings, you have to go back to the original texts themselves to collect them. It cannot be obtained by simply looking at a dictionary, but they are deeply practical and they inspire, because ultimately we'll come to why asana is called yoga. But we have to keep all these meanings in our mind, and only when these meanings define our asana practice, that is when asana truly becomes yoga. That is when it can be called yoga. Any questions? Yes, जी. माइक पे बोलेंगे तब सबको सुनाई देगा.
I am a Sanskrit student.
जी.
And you said the founder of yoga, Maharshi Kapil.
जी.
But in Mahabharata, जो लिखा हुआ है हिरण्यगर्भ योगस्य वक्ता नान्यः पुरातनः.
हिरण्यगर्भो योगस्य वक्ता नान्यः पुरातनः. जी, ये महाभारत का वाक्य है. अच्छा, मैं ढूंढ रहा था इस वाक्य को, तो मुझे इसका आधार मिला नहीं. मैं दोबारा देखूंगा ध्यान से. पर महाभारत का है कि नहीं इसमें मुझे निश्चय नहीं है. बट जी बोलिए.
हिरण्यगर्भ
जी.
सुप्रीम पावर ऑफ गॉड.
जी.
तो महर्षि कपिल ने भी जब अपनी माता को उपदेश दिया था योग के बारे में,
जी,
तो उन्होंने भी उन ब्रह्म को बारे में बताया था जो सुप्रीम पावर ऑफ गॉड है.
जी.
तो क्या कपिल ही वो योग के प्रवक्ता हैं या फिर वो हिरण्यगर्भ अलग है?
जी. So basically his question is that he has heard that Hiranyagarbha is the original master of yoga, and so is Kapila the same as Hiranyagarbha, or is Hiranyagarbha different? And he quoted a beautiful sentence from the text, Hiranyagarbho yogasya vaktananyah puratanaha, which means that Hiranyagarbha is the original speaker of yoga. There is no further ancient master than Hiranyagarbha himself. Now, I was speaking about human masters. Because when we speak in the context, मेरा समझ रहे हैं ना कि हिंदी में बोलूं? ठीक है, okay. So first of all, my question was about human masters, because Patanjali is a human master and Kapila is clearly the first human master. Hiranyagarbha, at least in the understanding of Vedanta, is, as you are a Sanskrit student, which is an amazing thing to be in today's time. I deeply respect that. In Vedanta, we say that Hiranyagarbha is Samashti Sukshma Sharira, which means the collective subtle body. And subtle body contains the intellect. And so Hiranyagarbha is intellect collectively, buddhi collectively. So it's the collective intellect from which even Kapila and all the great masters, they have received the teachings not only of yoga, but any teaching in India. For example, if you look at the Upanishads, what do we say in the Upanishads? Om Namo Brahmadibhyo Brahma Vidya Sampradaya Kartribhyo. Who started the tradition of Brahma Vidya? Brahma. Brahma, Hiranyagarbha, ek hi hai, they are the same. If you look at the Upanishads trace back their lineage to Swayambhu, which is again Brahma. Om Swayambhave Namaha. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where the Vamsha Brahmana, where all the Vamshas have been, all the lineage, all the masters have been mentioned, they trace back ultimately to Hiranyagarbha. So all the wisdom traditions trace back themselves to that original life force from which humanity as well as everything came into existence. That is what in the Vedas, Hiranyagarbha samavartatagre bhutasya jatah patireka asit. Aap is sukta ko jante hain avashya hi. So there, Hiranyagarbha from the very beginning is the source of life and light on this earth. And that is the ultimate source of everything. So it's also the ultimate source of yoga. So there is no problem about that. Ultimately, that's what I was speaking about as the master present within each one of us. When Patanjali speaks of that timeless master present within each one of us, that is what the Vedic traditions refer to as Hiranyagarbha. Hiranyagarbha, which means the one who has Hiranya, the light of knowledge in its womb, in its source, from which all this light of knowledge and wisdom has originated. That is called Hiranyagarbha. So when I was speaking about the timeless master present within each one of us, in Patanjali, in Kapila, in everyone else, then we refer to that Hiranyagarbha in the yogic traditions, who is the most ancient master. But Kapila, as the first human master, as one of the incarnations, as you must know very well, in Bhagavatam, in the very beginning, where the 24 incarnations of the divine have been mentioned, there Kapila's name is there as one of the most ancient masters. And particularly of Ashtanga Yoga, even in Bhagavatam itself, there, if you see the discussion of Ashtanga Yoga, you will find it in the discussion between sage Kapila and his mother Devahuti. There, Yama, Niyama, etc. Angas have been mentioned in the Bhagavatam itself. And that is why I say, when it comes to the human master, somebody who is in a human body, Hiranyagarbha is not a human body. Hiranyagarbha is that timeless essence present within each one of us. So he is ultimately the supreme source. But when we are speaking of a human Maharshi, a Rishi, a Muni, a great contemplative, then the best option by looking at all the yogic texts seems to be sage Kapila. Even Adinatha Shiva refers to the same timeless master. So there is nothing wrong when some of the yoga commentators, particularly one of the great practitioners of yoga in modern times, Hariharananda Aranya, whose commentary has also been translated into English. If you are really interested in the Yoga Sutras, you should look at his commentary. He has written a commentary in Hindi as well as in Sanskrit. His Hindi commentary has been translated into English, and he was a very serious practitioner in the 1940s. In the 1940s, he was a serious practitioner. He closed himself into a cave. Can everybody hear me? Yes. He closed himself into the cave for around, I think, 15 or 20 years in one cave just to practice what he was teaching in the Yoga Sutras. So he mentions in the very beginning this shloka which was recited by him, Hiranyagarbho yogasya vakta nanyah puratanaha. He said that the source is Mahabharata. It would be very interesting for me to find out whether the source is Mahabharata. Thank you very much. Any other questions, or I think the time is over? Any other quick questions? Okay, so let us conclude. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः।